Thank you very much for joining this webinar where I'd like to give you some information on the launch of a new list of per and polyfluoroalkylated alkyl substances. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just in terms of how the webinar will proceed, so I'll give you a bit of an introduction about the OECD UNEP Global PFC group, which this work has been conducted under. And then I'll turn things over to Zhanyun Wang from ETH Zurich, who worked on the development of the list, including input as well from countries and other stakeholders. And so he'll walk you through how the list was created and what it contains. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers, and the whole duration of this should be sort of up to 1 hour. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just a little bit about the OECD UNEP Global PFC group. Under the International Conference of Chemicals Management at their second meeting under the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management, so SICAM, there was a mandate to form this group to help facilitate the shift towards safer alternatives and implement some of the SICAM resolutions on shifting to safer alternatives for PFASs. So this group was created as one mechanism to try and support that shift. So it is a multi-stakeholder group that was established, I would say, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. So one element of the group is that we've published a number of different information pieces on PFASs, such as the synthesis paper that you see here. If we can go to the next slide, please. Also, a few years ago, we published a paper that looked to working towards a global emissions inventory of PFASs, and also a compilation of risk reduction approaches for PFASs, across country analysis, which we're updating some of the information at this time. So if you go to the next slide, please. So these publications and other information, sort of past information on things that have been done at the OECD and also in the context of the group, can be found at the web portal. So we launched a new web portal last July, and you see the link here, or if you just search OECD PFAS portal, you should be directed to this site as well. So here you can find the publications and links to the work such as that we'll be talking about today of the lists. We'll be using this portal in the future as well as a place to disseminate other information and if we have future webinars as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit about current or recent projects. So we've had a number of webinars over the last 2 years about knowledge sharing on alternatives. As I mentioned, we're also updating the risk reduction approaches in countries and disseminating that on the portal. Today you'll be hearing more about the updating of the list of PFASs, and stemming from that, we're also starting a project on updating the terminology for PFASs. I'll just mention briefly that in terms of the knowledge sharing on alternatives, we've also just this week launched a new survey to collect information on alternatives in 3 different sectors, and you can find that information and the links to the survey on the PFAS portal as well. So next slide, please. So this is just my final slide. I just wanted to give you a brief update of the context of this work, but I'd like to immediately pass things over to Zhanyun to focus on the topical point of this webinar, which is the new PFAS list. So Zhanyun, Nausicaa will pass you the speaker's rights and you can go ahead.
Yeah, many thanks. Okay, let me try to figure out how to share the slides. Yeah. No. Yeah, great. Many thanks, Eeva, for the introduction. I will briefly introduce the new OECD slide list of PFASs. Also acknowledge my co-author here, Martin Schreier from ETH Zurich. Today my talk will be divided into about 6 different sections. First, I will give you some background, motivation, and goals, why we want to do this project, and how the overall goal of this project. And then we'll introduce a bit briefly about the methods we use to develop the new list. Also, then we'll share some of the major results from this study, and also share with you about the limitations, gaps, and challenges. And we also will look a bit into the future, how we may address some of the issues identified, and brief acknowledgements. So I'm now going to talk more background about PFAS. I guess many of you are experts in the field. So the PFAS are previously kind of referred to as per and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals, PFCs. They are a very large class of man-made chemicals since the 1940s. Since the late 1990s, there have been a lot of studies on these, some of these PFASs, and consequently, these so-called long-chain PFASs have now been recognized as contaminants of high global concern because they are highly persistent, bioaccumulative, toxic, and they can transport to remote regions where there's no, far away from the emission sources. So consequently, there have been also a lot of ongoing regulatory and voluntary management actions to phase out long-chain PFASs, which is also kind of summarized in the OECD 2015 report on the risk reduction approaches mentioned by Eeva. But also, while we are dealing with a lot of these long-chain PFASs, there's still many more structurally similar PFASs on the global market. And this includes both overlooked legacy PFASs and also novel PFASs that have been developed to replace long-chain PFASs. And in recent years, a growing number of scientists, regulators, and civil society organizations are increasingly calling for effective and efficient assessment and management of all the PFASs. Here I list some quite important milestones, including the Helsinki and Madrid statements, and also workshops organized by some authorities, and also in other peer-reviewed articles. So in order to address all the PFASs, it is important to understand what are the PFASs on the global market or in the environment. And previously, there have been 2 major milestones on understanding the presence. One important piece is the OECD 2007 list on PFASs, which includes about 950 case numbers. And later on, there was also a more systematic study conducted by the Swedish Chemicals Agency, which identified about 2,000 different case numbers. So we build on these 2 important milestones, and further including other sources. The idea is to synthesize existing information in the public domain and thus to establish an up-to-date comprehensive list of PFAS that may have been on the global market. So this is our background, motivation, and goals. I will move into the methodology. So we basically check individual sources. The first step is we check if a substance has a CAS number or not. So in the current study, we only include only the substance with a CAS number. Then the second step is we look into the structure of different substances. We include like the we use the two screening criteria. One is there's a CN/F2N moiety, and the N is equal or above 3. And the other one is if we have a CN/F2N or CN/F2M moiety where like the N and M are equal to 1 or above. And then we could identify individual like PFASs in individual sources. Then the next step, we trying to harmonize the information across different sources, like to include sources that they will have the same CAS number, the same chemical name registered at the Chemical Abstract Service. Different synonyms have been used, including also trade names. What are the molecular formula? And the SMILE is kind of like it's a simplification of the structure with the letters. And we also included some of these previously used CAS numbers. And then afterwards, we use CAS number as the unique substance identifier, and then to compile the substance from different sources into one big list. And then we took another step further, is trying to categorize of individual PFAS, because we identified quite thousands of PFAS or the CAS numbers associated with PFAS, and it could be difficult to find individual PFASs. So I kind of established this categorization system so people can use different criteria to look for the PFASs they are interested. So we included 10 elements, for example, like regulatory registration status, if it has been registered in any regulatory list. And we categorize them based on the structure and the number of functional groups and chain lengths. And so these in total there are 10 elements, and then this forms the new list of identified PFASs. And in this study, we look 5 major groups of sources. The first is the existing list of PFAS, including the OECD 2007 list, and also the KEMI, the Swedish Chemicals Agency 2015 list. Then we also went through all these national, regional chemical inventories, and also the third category is the national, regional inventory of chemicals in specific uses. For example, like in food contact materials or in cosmetics in the EU. And then we're also looking to the national, regional inventories of chemicals subject to specific regulations. For example, like the Japanese government developed a kind of a list of examples of PFOA and the related substance based on the discussion of the POPs Review Committee and the Stockholm Convention. And in addition to these regulatory sources, we also look into scientific database, more specifically the Science Finder database. We're looking to like substance contain this structure moiety, and because the Science Finder database contains like millions of chemical structures, and not all of them are in comments. So we added additional criteria is that if a substance has a reference, like including peer-reviewed articles or patents, and also some sort of also the commercial sources within the Science Finder database, which could indicate that these substances are being used. Of course, and for all this is basically our methodology used to develop the new list. And for all the details about the individual sources, and also some of the categorization procedures, like you will find it in the summary reports, like associated with the new list. And so using this methodology method, we developed the new OECD 2018 list. And here's kind of a link to this list. So here are some also major findings. So in total, we have identified 4,730 CAS numbers. But I would like to point out that these 4,730 CAS numbers does not mean that these are 4,730 PFASs. Yeah, because some of the CAS numbers refer to mixtures of PFASs, and sometimes these mixtures can be extremely complex, like they were described as reaction products, and as it was not described in details, but from the chemistry point of view, there could be many different PFASs within this one mixture. And we also identify in some cases, some CAS numbers actually refer to the same PFASs, but it's just different way of calling them. So currently, it is very difficult to estimate how many actual PFASs, like individual substances, are there. So it's I think this will also need some more work, also to clarify what are these mixtures, and then we can get a better understanding of how many actually individual substances. But at least for now, we have a kind of a set of these over 4,000 CAS numbers. So I would like to also point out that the identified PFASs are very diverse in terms of structure. So here I will show you a kind of a figure that's trying to kind of group these PFASs based on the structure similarities among them. So you don't need to look into much in the details. You will find this figure also like in the summary report of the method. I would like to just point out that, like, in addition to this, the PFAS that we know quite well, like the perfluoroalkyl acids, and also some of these precursors, and like fluoropolymers, we have also identified the newer groups of PFASs which match the definition, but have not yet been commonly regarded as PFAS. Like one big group will be the per and polyfluoroether-based substance. So these are similar to this per and polyfluoroether carboxylic acid, but without the carboxylic group at the end of the chain, but with some other function group like OH group, and we also have identified many other new groups. For example, like these side chain fluorinated or aromatics, and some of these perfluorinated alkenes and derivatives. So these are also we may need to look into more in the future. So overall, the list is comprehensive, while it's not exhaustive yet. it gives good indication of which substance that may have been on the global market. And for quite some substances, as I said before, we also provide the SMILES, which might also be helpful to help you to kind of use this suspect screening or non-target screening methods to identify new unknown PFASs in different samples. In addition, we also try to provide as much information as possible on some of these PFASs. So for example, here is I show you that like normally some of these regulatory inventories contains additional information, and we have extract all this additional information and included in the new OECD 2018 list. So if you could take a look, and you will also find more information about some of these individual PFASs. So I use this here as one of the kind of lists from the US EPA chemical data reporting. Like this is the data from 2012. We can see that for some of the PFAS, like listed on this US EPA chemical data reporting inventory, they have the CAS number. They also tell you production or use volumes, although quite sometimes they are claimed as confidential business information. But additionally, they sometimes also tell you who produced this substance and how these substances are being used. For example, used as like reactants or like as as these non-incorporative activities. So this could also additionally help you to also encourage you to not only look at the list of these 4,700 substances, but also look into this additional information. As I also said, that our list is kind of comprehensive, but it's not yet complete. There are also some kind of limitations, gaps, and challenges. The first limitations is that the list is like it's one snapshot of the overview or state when the study was conducted, and meantime the new PFAS may be on the market, may be put on the market, or some PFAS may be taken out of the market, and this cannot be reflected in our list. The second is also that there's also information gaps within the source set we have investigated, mainly related to that there's quite some confidential business information, sometimes also refer to these chemical identities. So we can't really tell which these PFASs. So there are also some PFASs listed in this national inventory, but their chemical identity have been kind of claimed as confidential business information and without CAS number, so we cannot add it into the current list. And also, although I show you some about this production and use information, this is still very scarce. It's basically, I think it's only for hundreds of CAS numbers that we have identified. So still very big gap about the actual production uses historically and ongoing. And of course, also like the current selection from SciFinder may still be limited because we also identified substances without references or without commercial sources, but we know that they are also being used. But unfortunately, if we including those only have references or only have commercial sources, these will increase to the level of like 100,000 of substances. Then it's no longer, the list is no longer meaningful. There's also some gaps related to the information sources we investigated. So we have investigated still a very limited set of sources. There's still many company websites and also peer-reviewed articles, especially those new ones that do non-target screening, could potentially provide more information about some of the PFASs on the market and or in the environment. We also face some challenges in categorizing the PFASs. This is mainly associated with like some of these PFASs have been kind of registered with very vague descriptions. Here I give you two examples. One is the PFASs have been registered as polyfluoroalkyl. So this could be either PTFEs or could be also fluorotelomere-based substances. It's very vague. We don't know exactly. And there are also some substances they just described as kind of a raw material, oxidized, polymerized, reduced, and hydrolyzed. So it is really hard for us to understand what are the actual structure of these polymers. And the second is that there's associated with this kind of current PFAS terminology. So especially for those newly identified groups, such as cyclohexyl aromatics, or like a substance with two or multiple functional groups. And the third is also associated with the knowledge gaps. So the degradability of many PFASs, especially like, for example, this polyfluoroalkyls and derivatives, remains unknown. We don't know if they degrade or if they are very stable in the environment themselves as well. So the list is very comprehensive, but we also need to, with these limitations, gaps, and challenges in mind. But also these limitations, gaps, and challenges also point out that what might be the future priorities, for example, like the OECD UNEP Global PFC Group, as Eeva said, is hosting a project on expanding the current PFAS terminology, which would hopefully help us, like all stakeholders can speak the same language about PFAS, different individual PFAS substance. And we also identify that future cooperative actions are needed in the following three areas. First, perhaps it would be good to develop an online database that may be regularly updated and expanded. Of course, there's also this technical and financial challenges. I guess these days the technical side is rather easy to solve, but the financial side, I guess we will need to some good thinking how to solve this issue. And the second areas for cooperative actions would be to ensure that basic information such as chemical identities and the uses is accessible to all stakeholders and in a clear and consistent format. I think for a lot of people outside the regulatory agencies, especially I speak for myself, like if I don't know the chemical identity, it's really hard for us to do some work on this substance. So I think it would be very useful if this information can be made available to everyone. And the third is to address critical knowledge gaps, including the degradation of many substances, so that we can better understand the burden, the exposure that we are facing. So with this, I would like to gratefully acknowledge the UNEP, the OECD UNEP Global PFC Group for its very generous support and many very useful inputs during the development of this list. Also gratefully acknowledge the governments of Australia, Canada, and Sweden for providing data, and also for many others that I've been, had some conversation with, and also share some thoughts with. was very helpful. And also thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Zhanyun, very much for the presentation and going over how the list was created, what it contains, and also some of the limitations and gaps that we still have in the information. We hope that you'll be able to make use of this list in the work on PFASs and shifting to safer alternatives, and that this will be a resource that can be utilized in different work areas and also expanded upon as we move in the future. So thank you very much, Zhanyun, for the presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning or late in the evening, depending on where you are.